Under the towering Sierra Nevada mountain range in California lies a place called Manzanar. It answers the question, how do you connect with a loved one who captured history through their lens, even after they're no longer with us? In 1942, the U.S. Army leased over 6,000 acres here from Los Angeles to forcibly hold Japanese Americans during World War II. Over 10,000 people, families, children, entire communities, were sent to live in this barren desert, stripped of their homes and their freedom. I traveled there as part of my project, where I used vintage camera lenses as their original owners did. This lens belonged to my grandfather, J.A., the first photographer whose footsteps I followed in. It's strange how something so beautiful can coexist with such a tragic history. After World War II, J.A. was stationed in Japan as part of the U.S. military and documented the devastation in Hiroshima. The horror of that aftermath compelled him to document the stories of its impact. While I hadn't yet traveled to Japan with his lenses, I felt I could still honor him by documenting Manzanar, a place where Japanese Americans faced a different, yet connected, injustice. Both sites hold stories of loss and resilience, and I believe J.A. would have felt a deep connection here too. The first thing I captured was the iconic obelisk at the cemetery. The inscription in Japanese reads, I-Rei-To, or Soul Consoling Tower. There was a poem left at the cemetery that caught my attention. Freedom, oh freedom. Let us not repeat the history now. No more racial profiling. No more keeping prisoners without due process. What irony to be imprisoned in sight of these soaring mountains. It's a stark reminder of what happened here. My dream is to continue volunteering my photography to honor past photographers using their own equipment. If you have any lenses that belong to a loved one and you are interested in having them featured, please fill out the form below. The morning light wasn't quite right on one side, so I walked around to the other. Light and shadow playing across the half-exposed interior, a home torn apart, a parallel to so many families here. The barracks had thin walls, offering no insulation against the desert heat or cold winter, and yet families lived, worked, and tried to maintain a sense of dignity here. The rooms were bare, often with nothing more than cots for the families. These spaces weren't just places where people slept. They became classrooms, dining halls, and places of worship. People managed to build a life here under constant surveillance, far from their homes. There's an eerie irony to Manzanar. There's so much greenery thriving in the middle of this lifeless desert, just like the resilience of the people who lived here. The people here were held under guard, behind barbed wire, with armed military presence overseeing them. They were forced to leave their lives, jobs, and homes behind. People who had built businesses, educated their children, and contributed to American society. The conditions at Manzanar were harsh. Families were crammed into barracks, each small unit housing several families with little to no privacy. The summers were scorching, and the winters brought freezing winds down from the mountains. Yet, the people interned here created gardens, schools, and a community as best they could within the barbed wire. Signs around the site marked where blocks of buildings once stood, like the doctor and nurse quarters or the hospital. At Block 14, I found a basketball court, part of it surrounded by barbed wire. Growing up, I only ever heard brief mentions of places like Manzanar in US history classes. If it weren't for this project, this opportunity to capture images in the spirit of JA, I might never have made this trip. It's moments like these that make me so grateful for this journey, bringing me to places I might otherwise overlook. Though photographing Manzanar is not the same as photographing Hiroshima, it's as close as I could get at the time. I was still honored to capture images here using my grandfather's lenses. But that wasn't the end of the story. After saving up, I eventually traveled to Japan with JA's camera lenses. Most of the photographers I feature are strangers, but this one is personal. JA was my grandfather, and he's the reason I began this entire project. After he passed, I wanted to connect with him by following in his footsteps, using his lenses. That experience inspired this entire series. After World War II, he traveled to Japan, fell in love with the culture, the nature, and the landscapes, and documented the aftermath of Hiroshima. I made videos on each subject, with this being the last. It's been such an incredible journey retracing JA's steps and using his camera lenses, almost like I'm seeing the world through his eyes. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. It helps my channel a lot and allows me to keep exploring these stories. I've got a lot more photographers, more lenses, and more history coming up, so stay tuned.